Call the Monday, July 25th meeting to order. A roll call shows all council members present, and I'll turn the meeting over to our chair of the Community Development Committee, Mr. Wingard.
Great. We have a full agenda for community development tonight, so we're going to shoot for about 20 minutes of discussion per item. If we need to schedule more time or go a little long, we'll adjust as we go. But I'd like to make sure that we have time to address all three items in the community development agenda. And the first is the update on Bobscott County Jail construction renovation project. We are joined by County Commissioner Laura Sanborn and Sheriff Troy Morton. And we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Scott. Well, I'm going to turn all my questions over to the police department. I knew they wanted to handle it all. I appreciate the opportunity to come up and meet with each of you and kind of tell you what's going on. We're probably one of the busiest places in Bobscott County that most folks don't know anything about, and that's the truth. I can share that I've been with the county for 32 years. I started as a part-time corrections officer, and I've been blessed to work for an agency that's allowed me to see every piece of the criminal justice system. And when I say a system, corrections is part of that system. Often folks think that we're one part of it. And I hear a lot about the jail should do this and the jail should do that. When the truth is, it's the system that needs to do these things. The jail's one part. So law enforcement, our judicial partners are part of it, and then also corrections. The jail was originally built, and I know you won't go back this far with 20 minutes of time, because I can talk about this all day because I live it. But the jail was built in 1870. That was one of the original jails. It was a state prison back then, and it turned over to a county correctional facility back then. The purposes, which most don't understand today, of a county jail is to hold people for their initial court appearance. That was the original purpose of a county jail, and at the same time protecting the public from somebody who may flee from attending their appearance or may be dangerous to the public or to themselves. That was the purpose of the county jail. As time went along and the state prisons became more and more full, and they were looking for more and more bed space, statutes changed, laws changed, and more people ended up in county jails as sentenced individuals. So to move like 100 years forward, because we've got 20 minutes, we will say that in 1986, the jail was renovated. That's when I actually was in with the county and came in. And they renovated and they built on to the side of the old existing 1870s building. A couple renovations during the time. That jail was designed for 136 individuals at the time. And when I started in there, walked in, there were 66 individuals in the jail. And we didn't even use the third floor. The third floor was designed, part of the third floor was designed with sheetrock walls and wooden doors, thinking that low risk, no risk individuals, inmate helpers as they were called at the time, could be housed in this area. It would reduce the cost of building a correctional facility. And that's how they brought down the price of the jail at that time. And so as time went along, and a lot had to do with minimum mandatories that we saw, an opiate crisis that overwhelmed our state in the late 1990s, mid 1990s, when it overwhelmed our state, that we saw that much of the crime that we saw, burglaries, assaults, were back linked to opiate addiction. And most of it at that time in the state of Maine was prescription medications. Our population started to change, and we were watching this. At the same time, or a little bit later, was the change of our mental health system in the state. So if I could come up another day and talk with you folks about my frustrations about how poorly the state of Maine runs its mental health system, I'd love to do it, because I feel like, boy, that's really where we're not doing a great job. We're missing out. We're missing out there. And unfortunately, too many individuals are ending up in county jails and even the state prison system because there's not enough adequate services. We have great resources in our area. So it sounds like I'm talking both sides of it. I think we're resource rich in some areas. We have great crisis response people that can respond out to people in crisis, whether it's mental health or substance abuse. But ask those individuals, when they've done everything that they can do, trying to work with an individual, their loved ones, their families, and there still needs to be a place for that person to go, where do they take them? There's two places, the emergency department or jail. That's what happens. And that's not the way that we should be operating. So again, going back to our populations, as we started to see an increase in the amount of individuals that were in jail because of substance-related issues, mental health-related issues, we also saw our female population. When I was a brand new corrections officer in there, we had 2 or 3 females in the jail. Today, we have 30 or 40. The numbers have dramatically gone. What has the system done to improve? So I know you want me to touch on a couple things, and I'll try to narrow this straight down. So our building has not been renovated since. It runs 24/7, 365. It has one elevator that goes up and down and all old electronics inside the place. I just literally was on the elevator with an architect and an engineer riding on our elevator, and he held on to the walls like this. Our building is simply falling apart. Please, folks, if we can separate issues on whether you believe there's a need for jails or the number of beds, we have to separate the issue that this building is an old building. There are no staff amenities at all. I go to these beautiful fire departments and police departments all over Bobscott County and look how they treat our public safety people, which we should. Our officers don't even have their own restrooms. There are no kitchens for our staff. Our staff are working 18 hours. I've had 2 more staff members quit today because they cannot stand to work 18-hour shifts over and over in a building that's simply falling apart. It's just a physical plant that's falling apart. That's the physical side of it. The correctional side of it. What is the system trying to do to stop the numbers? So we were built for 136. The state came in and did an evaluation of the building. We have 265 state standards that tell us how to run a county jail. That's how much light is inside, the size of a trash can, how hot the food is, on and on and on, for all of these standards. And those standards say how much space you have to have in each cell, the beds, a desk, and all of those fixtures. So they came back in and reevaluated our jail and classified our jail, allowed us to put some more beds in, but there was no way to increase the actual cell size. So we went up to 180, and we were actually packing people. We had populations as much as 220 and 136 bed jail. That's how high the populations have gone in past years. And so the state came back in and looked at this and said, we need to reevaluate this. We're going to give you a state rated capacity. All jails have it, much like the hospital or anywhere else, or your schools have a state rated capacity. The jail has a state rated capacity of 157 individuals that can be in our jail. They gave us a variance that said, because of the crisis that you're in, the programming that you're doing, the diversion programs that you're using, and the thought that you may renovate, you may build new, you may do something to increase the space, we're going to give you a variance. They allowed that variance to go on from, I believe it was 2013 until today. That's how long we've been struggling, trying to move forward with a renovation, an adding of space, a new jail design, whatever it took to change the physical plan of our building. So that brings us forward, fast forward till today. The building is completely it's just falling apart. We have steel doors that are rusted through. We have electronics that do not work. So we all just lived it. I love your owl system here and all of this technology. Can you imagine trying to put this into a correctional facility that's locked down during COVID and run video arraignments with a building that was built before the World Wide Web was even unleashed? We have more conduit run in a security building along the walls, just trying to set the place up so we could put video arraignments for individuals. We added video phones in so that they could have contact with loved ones on the outside or professional folks. Again, that video phone should be tucked away in a private place so they could have a private conversation. Ours are right in the wide open. It's fortunate that they can make that contact, but it's being done in a space that's wide open because we forced it into a building that wasn't made for this. So again, our building is in great need of repair. I've been with our commissioners along the way. We've been through processes for the past several years about whether it should be a rebuild, a renovate. It's pretty hard to shut down the jail and go in and replace things and fix it, right? It's not like any other place. What are you going to do with all the individuals that are there? That's one of our challenges. The other places, for those that don't know, the building being downtown Bangor, where we have some land issues with the stream right behind us, and Court Street beside us, and the commissioners have done some great things looking at the property beside us with the Y. But that's really created some huge challenges for all the companies that have come in to try to figure out engineering. We're at a situation that we need to do something for the physical plant of the building. And that's what we're working on. If I can just shift gears just for a second, then I'll be quiet. I know it's hard to believe, but I will. What are we doing to reduce our population? One of the most important questions. So as we were looking at the early stages of the need for the jail, the projection thing showed our projections going at 300, 400, 500, just going up, going up, going up. And that's not adjusting with the criminal justice system, all of us together. What is the system doing to change? Some of it's done through legislation. We're trying to fight back against these minimum mandatories. So many of the laws that we have in place today have minimum mandatories that say a judge has no discretion but to send you to jail for a minimum of X amount of days. The judges like it, don't like it, the prosecutors don't like it, defense counsel doesn't like it. It leaves no discretion for an individual. It's one of the biggest problems. I testified in a couple of pieces of legislation to change that. We also have what they call the pretrial system that we didn't have decades ago. Pretrial system means we're taking a look at through a validated screening tool that says every single person that comes into our jail that does not bail out, they must go to court within 72 hours. If they do not get bailed out, they will be screened by our pretrial services. This isn't my staff. This is employed staff who has no bias in this, who will look at a tool and say, what is the risk of putting this person back into the community? And they use that risk tool. They work with the district attorney's office, the courts and defense, and make decisions on how many individuals should be out. Main pretrial services in Bangor has somewhere around 200, a little over 200 a day individuals that are out in the community. Directly from our jail, the average is 97. That means if we didn't have such a program in place, there'd be 97 more individuals setting in the jail. But this process has those individuals out in the communities. Some are in treatment, some are at work, some are sitting home on couch. And some, they don't know where they are. That's the difficult part of this, because we know sometimes that risk assessment doesn't work. We have a higher rate of transient people in the area. And so they're looking at that risk assessment. And sometimes when an individual is released, they don't know where to check that individual. So it makes it even harder for those case managers to go and check. So there's 100 individuals. Today's population for our jail was 159 individuals in the jail. 159 individuals in the jail. We have another 85 who are boarded out. And what boarded out means is we put them in another jail somewhere else around the state. We have agreements with a jail down in Two Bridges, which is in Wiscasset. And in Wiscasset, they will take those individuals in and hold them for us. They charge us $85 a day per individual. That's $2.5 million a year that we're spending because we don't have room for these individuals. That's just the money side. This doesn't even impact the amount of I'm taking you away from your family and housing you across the state. Your attorney, a program that I may have you in my jail, that when you're released, you can be connected to that program right here. You have no chance to do that because you're housed at a facility somewhere else.
Sure, I don't want to interrupt you. We do have people wanting to ask questions online. I just wanted to mention that we will have an opportunity to do a question answer. Now you can.
Sure.
Okay, keep going.
Don't hesitate to cut me off, because I live this and so passionate about it. And until you've been involved, you won't know. And that's why I feel like when we have the opportunity to share with folks, we try to tell a whole story, because there's a whole lot more to it than just a number of individuals that are incarcerated. So today, 159 individuals in the jail, 85 that are being warded out at other jails. There are 97 in our main pretrial program, which means they're out being released, supervised. And we have the only day reporting program in the state. And so a day reporting program is a program that in the 90s we used to call the first offender OUI program, where I think Orono used to benefit from this once in a while when the school was here, right? We would have people that come up and they would be arrested or convicted of operating out under the influence, and the judge may set them for that minimum mandatory of 2 days in jail. They go to the school, maybe paint some walls. I think that's what they do. All the workers up here for years, and they had to stay. It became so cost effective. It just cost us so much to house these people because we had to staff it overnight. We had to have somebody take care of medications. You have to remember, this is still a correctional program. So we still had to follow correctional rules. And so individuals were being charged $300 to $500 to attend them. And it was really difficult to do. These programs shut down statewide. It was easier to put somebody in jail for 2 days than it was to try to run that program. So we were fortunate, and I won't mention her name, but she's a resident of this area, who's a teacher who is absolutely amazing. You guys are so lucky to have this lady in your communities, who works with us from Riverside Adult Education, that helped us revamp this program and bring it back to life. We treat it today like an educational seminar. She has all of these programming groups, whether it's transportation, housing, workforce development, stress. They even do stress yoga during one of the classes. They run seminars so that folks can come in and pick a class. You attend during the day. The best benefit to this is when you leave, you've accomplished something. You've been connected to programs. Many people are enrolled in programs, so when they walk out, they're already enrolled in that program. It's a great way to connect people. So again, what does this do? It diverts people from the jail. They don't pay $300 to $500. They pay $50 just to pay for their lunches. They don't stay overnight. They're treated like individuals, and we treat it as a therapeutic approach through an educational model rather than a punitive approach. We're the only place running within the jail. The reason I tell you about that program is these are the types of things that we're doing to try to change the system. Here's the bad thing about this. I rent a room to do it. I have to rent a room from a church because there's no place in our building on our campus that I can do this. I have to go rent a space somewhere else. And if we had a place that we could do this, I could roll this out 5 times more than what we're doing today. Prosecutors love it. Defense counsel loves it. It's a shame that some of the other counties south of us are so interested in our program. They're trying to send its people to our program. So I try to get them to take care of Bobscott County. So I could go on forever, be happy to answer questions. There's a need for the physical change. That has nothing to do with our inmate population. And if we need to talk about what are you doing with programming, today's needs in the jail are tremendous. Medical, mental health, medical assisted treatment programs. To serve the 40 individuals that we have on our MAC program takes us an entire day to get them through the process of getting their medication. What that means is it's a process. When somebody takes their Suboxone, we don't want them to divert it in the facility. And so there's a process that they have to go through. Because our population is so diverse, males, females, maximum security, co-defendants, on and on and on, it takes our medical staff an entire day to do this, where other places they could do 40 people on an hour. It's some of the challenges like that for any program that we have in our jail. We have to move people. In Two Bridges Jail down in Somerset, down in Wiscasset, or Somerset County Jail in Madison, they have rooms built on the cell blocks all around. So they don't have to move the inmate population. They only move the provider. We have one room where we move all the inmates. It takes us all day to do anything.
So Sheriff, I think our conversation started with a concern that was shared by a resident. And we are really interested in whether you settled on renovation or reconstruction, and how your process might go forward.
Thank you for, having us. And the word expansion is where we're gonna need all of you. Any of you that can give, I can give you my card, come and take a tour. We're not expanding, numbers. We're gonna bring all the Penobscot County prisoners back to Bangor, so they can, have a space for programming. And if you, if you do take me up on a tour, if you could see the medical facility, it would, it breaks my heart. How in the world they ever feed these people every day, is unbelievable. And there's so many services in our area, but we've got to have the space to do it. Out in the community, like you all are, letting people know it's not a expansion, it's giving space to house our people.
So what, I'm still.
Okay, yeah, and then where we are. The architect that we're working with is in town now. Tomorrow, we're meeting with them, with Haley Ward, and hopefully, we'll come up with a design plan. And our focus right now, we were hoping to do the November for a referendum for a bonding, if, what, the project comes in at. Or, so now we're looking into, next June for a bonding.
We're not,
Oh, I was just going to ask, how does the public participate in this process?
Right, by, every Tuesday, Penobscot County is the only county in the state that meets every Tuesday. Our website, you can go on there, leave a comment. We have the best monitor, Mary Ann O'Kelly. You put a question in, and the commissioners, the sheriff, there's a direct line, to all of us. I get back to my people immediately, whoever calls. So, just, come to us, don't listen to what you hear out on the street.
we are not at a position that we have draft plans. So a couple of years ago, that process took place. There were 8 or more companies that submitted 8 different plans, from totally rebuilding to building on, building across the street, all of those things. And the cost was extremely high. The commissioners wanted to revisit, come back to a new approach, new idea. We all got hit with COVID. It kind of changed everything for everybody, put everything on hold. And we're back into it now, trying to engage the community for information. But we're not at the position today, the county's not, that we have these in place. We were hoping to get there this year to at least have the financial approximates. Building the jail is expensive, building anything is expensive today, no matter what the building is.
Well, I don't want to keep your time. I'm aware of everybody else's time. I'd like to first hear from council and see if there are questions from council, and then we'll hear from the public, and we'll take some public questions and comment. Or anybody?
Sure, I have a question. I'm curious how many current inmates are incarcerated due to failure to pay bail. Is that an issue that you see, and do you have those statistics
So
in
there's-
mind?
Just to clarify, you're saying bail, not fines.
That's, I would say I'd be interested in answers to both of those.
This is good. I love this discussion.
Thanks.
There's no such thing as not paying bail. So when you're saying somebody didn't pay the debt, if you're saying they've not been able to
They
secure a bail.
can't meet the status, they can't satisfy cash bail in order
Gotcha.
to get out. That's what I'm asking.
Yep. All right.
So essentially, are they in for being poor?
So the bail process, as you may or may not know, the past several legislative sessions has taken great reform,
Mhm.
has taken great steps so that individuals are not held in custody because they can't make bail. You have to look at this, that some individuals, a $500 cash bail might as well be $1 million.
Yeah.
They can't make it.
Yeah.
There is more hearings, and hence a lot of our video hearings are motions to review bail,
Mhm.
to modify bail, to adjust bail. And so I would say in those 97 that are out today, And the many more that are going out on bail, and on top of that, even before that, the more individuals that are being issued summonses versus arrest. It is much higher than it has been in the past. Individuals that are still currently incarcerated in jail, there's not individuals sitting in jail on $100 cash bail.
Yeah.
That's a misnomer. You could look at our site every day at the charges that individuals are in for and what their bails are. And if you look at the ones that are beyond 72 hours, you'll see people aren't sitting in jail. And the other one that's absolutely a false thing that the public talks about often is people are held because they can't pay a fine. Absolutely not true.
Are there other council questions or comments?
When you said more people are being served summons rather than arrests, is that partly incentivized to the fact that the jail is at capacity?
That is a big issue with it. So I hear often, and I won't say from Orono, but I hear from many police chiefs, business owners, and folks that are furious. We provide regional booking services, which means that if an arrest, if a physical arrest takes place, that an agency can bring that person to the jail and have them processed there. That takes a tremendous burden off that municipality. You don't have to have a booking station. It's a lot safer when you have communities that may only have 1 or 2 police officers on at a time, and it's consistency bail commissioners on. And so during the COVID process, when we were in outbreaks, or an outbreak again at the jail, when we're in a COVID outbreak or the COVID processes, and we asked police departments to review and utilize summonses. Here's one of the challenges that many chiefs said would happen, and we're seeing that come true now, is individuals that were issued summonses that did not appear in court. A year later, now we're getting flooded with warrants for failing to appear in court. I got that summons to a lot of today. The failure of peers, which goes back to your question, is now the court's saying, okay, I've got to add this into my process of, can I trust that you're going to come back to court, whether it's $100 bail or $1,000 bail? Are you going to come back to court?
I'm also, thank you for answering that question. I'm also curious, I was reading something, the Maine Department of Public Safety reported recently that states, Bobscott County's crime rate has fallen by almost 45% since 2010. And so I'm wondering why
So
we continue to be at capacity there.
the one thing that they won't tell you in that is the unified crime reporting system is dramatically different than it was 5 years ago. We don't even use the same unified crime report. That statistic comes from unified crime reports. It's called UCR. All police departments are required to report to UCR. So what you'll see is, although a lot of crimes are going down, it may be crimes like shoplifting or things like that. If you go in and look at assaults, drug trafficking, robberies, those are actually going up. Where what you hear in the report is that crimes going to the UCR, which is now called the NIBR system, are actually going down. That's a good thing, right? So we're seeing a trend of some of those crimes going down, but they're classified by crimes. There's some that don't even fall into that reporting system, such as loitering or disorderly conduct or things like that. Those aren't even hitting some of those crime reporting statistics.
I think as a council, we might revisit in a workshop our perspective on crime. I want to maximize the time we have with our speakers tonight to talk specifically about the jail visioning process, the construction process, and things like that. I wonder if our online person is.
Jeff, I do have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay,
That is related to that.
Yeah.
If that's okay. So I think that something that this conversation highlights is that how you frame something makes a big difference in terms of how people perceive it. You have referenced that yourself many times. And clearly you know your audience when you're coming to the town of Orono and talking about the benefits for the humanity of the prisoners and their comfort, the comfort of staff. However, one can take a set of information and frame it in such a way as to make one appeal or another. That's how information works. And so I was going to ask this question directly, but since you're saying there is no draft plan yet, one thing that I would highlight and want to know, and I would assume a lot of people would also want to know, is when you talk about so much of the renovation would be related to improving staff areas and the comfort of inmates, to actually understand in terms of data, how much of the money that taxpayers are expected to put up for the project would actually be for renovating staff areas so that they can, have a humane workplace, or renovating medical facilities specifically for the comfort of the inmates and of the providers who work in that line of service. Because the flip side of the argument, and what I think possibly Rob was getting at and asking about, people being summoned versus held, is when you expand, because it is an expansion. I know that word is problematic for you, and I understand why, but it is an expansion. You're framing it now as we're not expanding the numbers, we're bringing people back to Bangor. But also you begin your anecdote with, back in the 80s, we only had 60 people in this jail. So when you expand, that means that there is more room for more people. And I think the public would want to know what percentage of those tax dollars are going to fortifying this facility and expanding its ability to house more people over time. And I also think that when we say, and I'm going to say this very carefully because I'm not here to inflame any political debate right now. I want to ask about this jail and that's it. But when we say, what's it going to take? There's problems with the system, and I agree with you. The problems don't live in the correctional facility. It's part of a larger system that needs other types of reform. There is an argument to be made. I'm not making it, but there is an argument. I'm not making it in this forum, I'll say, but there is an argument to be made that when you say, what's it going to take to actually put the pressure to change the system that results in some of the things you're experiencing in a correctional facility, there is an argument to be made that the pressure is, if we don't fund the expansions, lawmakers will be pressured to make changes in the system to result in lower prison populations and jail populations. And that is a valid argument. So I say these things just not to get into a discussion or debate about them, but just to highlight some of the things that I think the public is going to be very interested to hear about when considering whether they want to spend tax dollars on this expansion.
I'm gonna sidestep that and go back to just a process statement around, I think what Commissioner Sanborn said is, we don't have a proposal yet. When we have a proposal, the commissioners are gonna consider that, and it's gonna go out to referendum. And that is a very quick way to say, the county has a process to get input into the jail expansion, and ultimately the taxpayers get to decide whether or not they're going to fund it. And so I'm wondering if there was an ask of the council to the county, it might be that would the county make extra effort to ensure that municipal officials knew when these public forums were coming up? Would they provide us the opportunity to link to their project page? Would they have a project page on their website so that everybody could see it? And would they please commit to at least one evening information session for the public to come and understand the expansion and take questions from the community? So I guess that, I hate to, whenever I go there, they make me leave with a work assignment. So I really kind of feel like we should turn the tables just a little bit. But I would think that was a very brief segment. And I think there are direct ways for community members to voice their opinions and to participate in this.
And we really, we're gonna have public hearings, and we have to, by law, before we, do anything. So, these questions are the same, questions, that we've dealt with for, years,
In the last process, when we went through this, there were more than 60 organizations that came and spoke publicly.
I'd like to honor the time of the people who are participating online and waiting to speak in person. I know we're over time already, but is our online participant still here, Belle? Great,
Yes. There's
All right.
4 who have their hands raised.
okay. Well, let's hear from those. And are there people in the chambers, one in the chamber? So
Can I give up my seat for the person in chamber to sit, and we'll let Belle manage?
yes, please. Can we hear from the people online first? That just might be a more efficient way, but please come on up and join us. Belle, can you promote or give permissions for? people to
Sure.
speak? And if people speak, could you introduce yourself? And remember that our conversation tonight is about the process and information seeking, and it's not sort of a more global discussion about criminal justice reform.
So there are now 5 hands raised. I will begin with Marshall Mercer, and then Doug Dunbar will be next, and then P. Turner will follow. So I'm going to allow Marshall Mercer to speak.
Thank you. Mr. Mercer.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
I didn't know the officer's name. What's your name, officer? Question up.
This is Sheriff Morton.
Sheriff Warden. All right, thank you. Hi, my name is Marshall Mercer. I'm an organizer for the Main Recovery Outreach Project. You said that there was a risk tool that was created, and it wasn't your staff that was actually doing the risk pooling. So my curiosity is, who creates the risk tool? And are there any marginalized people or people of color that create that? Because a lot of these tools that are created for people are created for a certain demographics of people. And I'm not saying this to stir anything up, because we've been working with the correctional department, and you guys actually stepped up the game. So, but even though there's a lot of work to be done, some of these structures that's been created has been created by a system that's been around for 100 years. So it's like time for a change type thing. So I'm just curious, do you know who created those risk tools? Even though it's not your staff pushing it?
So the risk pools are national risk pools that Main Pretrial Services utilizes. And I apologize, I don't know the exact name of that tool. I certainly could get it.
It's okay.
But it is the risk pool, the risk tool that they used came nationally. I believe they have dubbed the name Main Pretrial Risk Pool as a change for the tool, but it's used in many of their services. They provide that service not only to Bobscott County, but many other counties.
One more question.
Very quickly, and we have to stay on topic with the jail construction project, please.
Not a problem. How many people of color do you have employed?
How many people of color do you have employed in the sheriff's department?
I don't know the exact number.
Okay, that's all right. Thank you. I don't want to take up too much time.
Thank you very much. Let's hear from the next speaker, please.
Thank you all, and thanks for having this discussion. It's really important. My name is Doug Dunbar, and I had spent 30 years in government. I was Maine's Chief Deputy Secretary of State. I was John Baldacci's press secretary in the governor's office, as communications director during his 8 years in Congress. I worked for George Mitchell before that, did other things in government. The only reason I'm telling you that is because my career ended when I ended up in Penobscot County Jail for the better part of 136 days. I went to jail on October 23rd, 2017. I began self-medicating with alcohol right after 9/11, when I was working on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. as John's press secretary. And I self-medicated with alcohol to deal with 2 mental illnesses. And the reason I'm telling you this relates directly to the jail. So I suffered my entire life from obsessive compulsive disorder and anxiety, the trauma of 9/11, caused me to begin self-medicating. The years went on, I moved back to Maine, worked in the governor's office, deputy secretary of state, and so on. The drinking spiraled out of control, ended up in jail. And what I can tell you is there is more than enough space in Penobscot County Jail if we focus on what is needed. Here's what's needed. Support for people with mental illness, support for people with substance use disorder, and more focus and funding on housing. Those are the three critical reasons that people end up in jail. And let me tell you, I really like Commissioner Sanborn, but please don't listen to what she said about not listening to other voices. At one point, she
Thank you,
said,
Mr. Dunbar. Thank you very much.
because I think it's important to listen to all voices, and so there's ample
I
room.
think we've heard your comment about the structure of the jail. Thank you. Is there another speaker in the queue, Bill?
Yes.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Peggy Turner. I just lost my niece, Nicole Turner, in the York County Jail. She just passed away from a suspected overdose. We're not sure yet, but I also, I just want to know how much does it cost taxpayers for each individual that's jailed a year?
I want to go back to Mrs. Gardner.
Stop it.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm going to go back to this. How do you frame that? And so how much does it cost to keep an individual in jail per day? The old fashioned way of doing this, the only way that somebody could do this, take your average daily population, divide it by a budget. That could be different for every entire facility. If your jail, like the Somerset County Jail, has a jail deficit budget or a mortgage payment on that jail, that's going to be added into that. That's going to tremendously.
It's a rough estimate.
It could, I don't know how to do that, man.
Like it used to be like average $30,000 a year for one cellmate, correct?
Well, again, that goes back to what I just said is. It
Okay.
depends on who
So-
framed it and how they put it that way.
So I think renovation, if you need renovations, yes, but I think intervention is the key. How many of them that you have of the 100 and something have co-occurring diagnosis or in there for misdemeanors, for substance use? How many of those are in there for those diagnoses or doing the MAT or medicated assistant treatment?
I suspect that percentage is extremely high.
So if
Thank
you
you.
were to expand, instead of expanding, how would you, even if you expanded, how would you staff, could you even get the staff to include the mental health aspect of the team, not just the medical, but you're talking psychiatry, assessments, diagnosis, med management, treatment? Would you be able to get the staff to even staff that if it were to expand
Turner,
instead of opening
kind of a
another
more-
facility?
That's a more global question than we can address in this forum, which is specifically focused on the building plan and process. But I would encourage you to follow up with those questions, but it's a little bit outside the scope of what we're here to discuss tonight. Do we have another person in the queue, Bill?
We have Janet Drew.
Ms. Drew?
Hello, I'm Janet Drew. I'm a retired nurse. I live in York, Maine. I actually had some of those last questions that Peggy did, because I think what has motivated many of us is knowing that at this point in time, there is money that was called the American Rescue Plan Act money given to hospitals, utility companies, and county jails and towns to rescue the American people. And when having identified housing is across the country a crisis, substance use, mental health follow. Obviously, if you don't have shelter, your mental health is at risk.
Ms. Drew, is there a question or a comment that's pertaining to this particular expansion?
Yes, and it goes back to staffing, because today the jail cannot staff what it needs to do the job. So to expand a building when what we need is people to provide care, to me is not going in the right direction. And computers make it a lot easier to serve warrants and arrest people, but we need helpers. And the money is there at the county level, at the regional level. We ought to be able to help people.
Thank you.
Thank
Bell, let's hear from our last online comment.
Hello.
Yes, please
Hi.
introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Daria Cullen. I live in York County, Maine, and I agree with Sheriff Morton's statement earlier that in Maine we're resource rich. However, those resources are poorly funded. So my question here today is, why would we expand and renovate the jail instead of increasing funding for those resource organizations that offer community-based solutions and are actually saving lives? Jails, as we all know, are not designed to be health and healing centers. They're designed to be punitive and dehumanizing. And that's a fact. I just want to finish, if I could, please. That's why we need care and treatment for mental health and or substance use disorder moved outside of the jails, and that funding that you're talking about potentially putting towards a renovation project could go to those community-based solutions. And lastly, I'll just say, in the last 4 weeks, there have been 4 deaths between Cumberland County and York County jails, both of which have established MAT programs, the medical assisted treatment. So right there, and unfortunately one of those folks was Peggy's niece, it only reinforces, and I hope everyone really considers this part, that we need to treat people in an appropriate medical facility and not a jail. And that's where those dollars need to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Collins. Thank you. All right, we've had commentary waiting very patiently in person. Brian, would you like to address?
Yeah, sorry, I'll pull something up really quick. but
Yeah, sure.
Not a big deal. So,
And
go ahead.
and please, we will have time to do a deeper dive in a workshop setting into some of these larger systemic issues, but let's be respectful.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
First, for those I haven't met, I'm Dr. Brian Pittman. I am here in my own capacity, not on behalf of my employer. So I always like to make that clear. I'm keeping my space because I'm traveling soon. So hopefully nobody takes offense to me leaving a mask on. So if you have trouble hearing, just let me know. My questions, I'll keep the questions as opposed to comments and respect for people's time. But I did want to echo Dr. Gardner's statement that this is an expansion. What I was trying to pull up was the call for proposals. In the call for proposals, it says explicitly 157 to 360. I don't know how that can't be categorized as an expansion, but just wanted to point that out. Is the plan still to pursue this as a bond issue on the ballot in November? No. Is there a possible timeline for when you are hoping this will get ballot? Or does it depend on paperwork?
We're hoping for June of next year.
June of 2023. Can I address just one of those, because this is helpful, I think. So 159 in our facility today, and 85 that belong to Bobscott somewhere else is much closer to the 300 than 159. Right? So those 85 individuals are Bobscott County responsibility of Bobscott County. Just because we're boarding in somebody else's jail doesn't mean it doesn't relieve us of the responsibility for it. So if we brought them back, that's going to put us up to 250 to 260.
That's
I
what
mean,
we're
it's in the
working.
middle of 360, I wouldn't say it's necessarily close to it, but
Yeah,
I mean, it's still,
the
you're
jail,
calling for 360.
no, the jail's never, it is not 360.
But the proposal says we're calling for extension up to 360.
That's not correct.
That's what the call for.
But that's
proposal
what we're
says.
negotiating.
That was
with.
in the other facilities and those old plans 2 or 3, maybe 3 years ago now. What was a plan and I don't remember ever even 360. I think it was 300. But different different architects gave us different sizes.
Okay. Is the county still planning to use American Rescue Plan funds for this?
That'll be, help decided by the Bobscott County Budget Committee, which is made up of municipal elected officials. They'll, go through the proposals. And then, ultimately, the commissioners will make the choice. But we're gonna be working with, with the budget committee for their recommendations. So no promises on that.
And Sheriff, have you done any independent evaluations of the program that you lauded as successful?
The day report.
No, like you were talking about some programming. I think that, sorry, I was.
Is that that's maybe an operations question rather than a question about the process of bonding and envisioning?
I mean, I guess that I thought it went into the process question just because that's the justification they're using for asking for that. So I'm curious about the actual success of the programming that they're saying if they have more space to do, then, is there documented success to that program? Are there independent evaluations of that program?
I'd love to have the conversation with it another time, but I can answer this real quickly. Our programming in the facility is no different than the programming outside. So individuals are saying that that program is successful and it's like the MAP program. It's touted as a successful way to address substance use disorder. And so it's the same providers. We don't provide it ourselves. We have providers that come in and do that. PCHC is involved and CHCS is involved in our medical provider. So we utilize them using that program. That theory, if it's going to work in the community, should be able to work at least get a person initially into a program and get that started.
Yeah, I guess in a jail, though, it's a very different context because
Absolutely.
you're talking about a coercive environment where people might feel pressure to take on that program to get out of there. So
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why I'm asking about the actual within the jail.
Yep.
Aside from comments that I have about the jail itself and the impact that incarceration has, those are all the process
Thank
questions.
you very much. Yeah. And we should mention that it was Dr. Pitten's message to the council that started this conversation. We're going to continue to have this conversation. So I appreciate your time. Are there any other comments from council before we allow our guests thoughts?
I would like to say that thank you both for coming. Thank you to Dr. Pittman for coming. And thank you to everybody who gave comment over Zoom. I think it shows how important this issue is, the issue of incarceration of our people. What it means, this expansion, or however you want to phrase it, I think has great impact on our people, regardless of which way that decision ends up going. So I think it's important that we take this time. And I know we're going way over the time that you had originally allotted, and I appreciate all of the work you did to try to keep the conversation going. So yes, lots of thank yous.
Can I just follow up with next steps? I'm making an assumption, want to make sure it's the correct assumption, but I gave a laundry list of things that we might ask the county commissioners for. Are you all set with me actually asking the county commissioners for those things?
Yes.
Okay, and the second thing I heard was a desire to have a workshop that more substantively addresses concerns around the criminal justice system. Is that?
That would probably be appropriate, but it might not require the time of our guests.
Yes.
I think another person to be into this conversation would be the district attorney Lynch. And, her diversion program. She's kept 500 people, out of the system. And with that, I serve on the Board of Eastern Maine Development and NQuest, and they're active partners and some of the letters, that people are, there's one individual that's going for a house loan now, so. She has some, real hands-on. Yeah.
Perhaps as this one's for, I'd love to have you folks come down and tour. Yeah. You have to understand the physical plan. I understand what folks are talking about in the criminal justice system. I have that conversation all day. We need to include judges, district attorneys, defense counsel, all of those parties to that discussion. The physical plan is almost by itself. The building's walls are falling down. It's not about adding a single cell. As the gentleman, doctor mentioned before, I apologize, I'll get your name wrong, but the doctor mentioned about the numbers. If you look at our current count, we're talking about building or renovating to the size of our current numbers, very, very close. The other thing that folks don't understand sometimes is, while we all may represent one seat or one bed in the jail, if you're doing this by a bed count, we can't all be housed together. We lose beds because of our population. So if you have some cells that are 15 people in a cell, you may only be able to put 10 in there because of their classifications.
Thank you very much. for your
Thank you on
time.
forever, couldn't we?
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys.
so
very
much,
much.
yes.
Thank you all. Appreciate your
Appreciate your
time.
time.
Don't invite us back now.
Oh, I will invite you back.
I'll come
Anytime.
take a tour.
Let me know. Yeah. If you want to do it individually as a group, be happy to do that.
Great.
It would make more sense if we could do it individually. That way we don't have to notice public meetings and.
That makes sense.
Understood.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Whatever it works. We may have you work a shift too.
Thank you. Laura.
All right. Moving along, discussing correspondence from the Orono VC Water District regarding public referendum on fluoridation of public water supply. We received that correspondence. Do we have a presentation or a?
So
Let's speak to-
Farad Dastur is the person who provided the letter. He's a trustee. I know that Boyd had a conflict tonight, but he is on Zoom if you want to invite him to speak.
Sure. Sure, he's available.
So I have allowed him to speak, but let me know if you'd prefer for me to promote him to a panelist.
I don't know what the difference is.
It looks like if he turns on his video, he would be a panelist if he so chose.
No, he doesn't have the ability to turn on his video
Oh,
because
gotcha.
we only allowed him to
Okay.
speak. But I'd be happy to promote him when he would have a video.
That would be wonderful.
There he is.
All right. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, this is Farad. This is a little unusual because we were not told that we were going to be able to speak at all. So I'm sitting here in my living room completely unprepared. Just thought I would zoom in to hear what the discussion was.
Sure. Well, we don't want to put you on the hot seat. Our purpose is to review with the council the process or processes that are available to discuss or vote on fluoridation.
Do you want
So,
me to just
yeah,
summarize my memo?
Yeah. Why don't Sophie go ahead and do that?
So in the background material, I did include a memo. The letter we received from the Orono VZ Water District asked us to facilitate or asked if they can help us facilitate a conversation around this topic and really wanted to move the idea of putting a referendum around fluoridation of the public water supply on the ballot. So this letter came in earlier this month, and it's kind of has a history, so I thought I would just give a plotted history. So the Orono and BZ public water supply has been fluoridated since 1961. That was a referendum election at that point. In 2019, the town councils in Orono and BZ were contacted by a resident who wanted to stop the practice. We went ahead And as we had in the past, just referred people on to the water district because that's their responsibility, is to deal with public water. And what we learned, this is the only resident we'd ever referred on that actually came back and said, they said it was your issue, not theirs. And so it caused us to dig into it and learn that the power to decide whether to fluoridate or stop the practice of fluoridation is vested in the voters in the municipalities that form a water district. And the only people that can call those elections are the town councils or the municipal officers. So we went through a process late 2019. The town councils agreed to hold a referendum election, thinking it would be on the next municipal election because that's the annual municipal election. We learned that it couldn't be held then because it had to be held during a general election, which only happens every other year and aligns with the state. Had to be November, had to be a general election. When we were creating the work plan for the FY 22, right, the one that we just got done, the councils in BZ and Orono agreed that this was kind of a bigger topic than just deciding to put a referendum question on, that the councils really wanted to dig into it and understand whether they felt it was in the public interest to put this question on a referendum. In that vein, in October of 2021, Orono and BZ held a joint workshop. There were representatives from Maine Oral Health Coalition and Fluoride Action Network, representing two diverse opinions. It was publicized, counselors, water district people, and residents were invited to come and give comment. At the end of that process, BZ and Orono councils went back to their respective communities and both elected not to move forward with the process. So that is where we are. In February of 2022, a resident submitted a request that we look at this again. Council considered that and decided that they really felt like they had just gotten done doing that and asked that we not move forward with that and look at a public petition if people wanted to move forward. So what that brings up is, in statute, there are two ways to bring this question before voters. One way is for town councils to decide on their own to put the question on a referendum. That decision has to be made, to call the referendum election has to be made 90 days before the referendum. So that deadline is August 10th for this particular question. The Orono and BZ, towns of Orono and BZ are the sole entities that are served by this public water supply. So in order to move things forward with a town council vote to call an election, there has to be unanimous agreement. So both entities have to, because it's a majority. If there were three, it would only be two, but one of two does not make a majority. So the other option is for residents to, in either community, to gather signatures on a petition. They need to get signatures equal to 10% of the number of individuals that voted in the two communities together in the last gubernatorial election. So in this case, that's 543 people. That needs to be submitted 120 days before the election. So the deadline for filing for this most recent referendum for the coming election would be August 10th for the town council to call the election, or July 11th, 2022, which is passed, for a petition to come in. For 2024, the deadline would be August 14th, 2024 for the town council to call an election, or for a petition to be filed by July 6th, 2024. After the election is called, but no less than 10 days prior to the election, there has to be a public information meeting held in both communities, not in either, in both communities. And then all registered voters in both communities vote, and it's the majority of all votes that make the determination. The question that goes on the ballot would be a question of shall the water supply be fluoridated? So it's a positive question. It's created by statute. I think that sums up.
Do we have any indication that VC Town Council is taking this issue up before August 10th?
So Mark Leonard, the manager who co-wrote the memo that everybody had in their background, is at a VZ Town Council committee meeting as we speak. It is on their agenda to talk about, so we would know more after tonight. And Farad has a continuous question.
So are there any questions or comments from councilors?
Yes, having lived through this process where we had an extensive discussion about this, I keep coming back to, and one thing that was kind of difficult to navigate when we had the kind of big meeting where we heard from different folks was the question put to the town council is not on the issue of whether fluoride should be in the water supply. It is the question of should we put it out to referendum for people to vote on it? And what I keep coming back to as an elected official and as an individual is that it is very difficult for me to reconcile saying, trust the CDC on various issues like masking and other issues that the CDC is charged with protecting the public health. And then say, but not all of them. We pick and choose which ones. The CDC still supports this practice, not only supports it, but I was looking again at the CDC's website earlier, and it notes that in 2018, community water systems that contain enough fluoride to protect teeth served more than 73% of the US population. Because it is so beneficial, the United States has a national goal for 77% of Americans to have water with enough fluoride to prevent tooth decay by 2030. So the CDC is not looking over this issue right now to see if it wants to make adjustments. It's not even just holding the status quo. The United States has a goal to increase the percentage of the population that receives fluoride. So it's just difficult for me to say, I think we should put this out to a vote, because to me, that's also saying, I trust the CDC on some things, but not on other things. And that isn't really a position that I feel I can reconcile. So what I would say is a public petition where people were able to get 500+ signatures would indicate there was a groundswell of community support of people who would say, you know what, I hear the CDC, but maybe they should look into it more. Maybe we should all be looking into this more. That would say to me, sure, there's community support, but for me to send it to referendum, I just can't reconcile that.
I want to echo that, what Megan said so eloquently. Is that I will also consider action if there is a public petition, but if there is not, there's no indication. And I'm in agreement that we follow CDC guidelines on so many things, and CDC guidelines right now say that fluoride is beneficial and it helps children. And that's what we need to, that's my personal stance. But again, if the town wanted to circulate a petition if there were enough people. And it's 545, I believe is what Sophie said. Then I would consider taking the matter up again, but not unless.
If I'm reading the timeline in your memo correctly, Sophie, the tricky thing is that we've already passed the filing deadline for a public petition. And so for this upcoming one, and that does seem like a bummer to me, because I do think that a groundswell of community support to me would be really compelling evidence that this is something we should consider on the behalf of those.
But Sonia, I will just add that we said this same exact thing when we had the conversation a year plus ago. We said, please do a public petition if you have the groundswell of support, and that didn't happen.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, I think if there was such a petition, even though that deadline is passed, maybe council would come around, is what I'm hearing, to those who may be listening in.
I guess gonna be a shocker for everyone, but personally, I don't have any issue with having this go to referendum and letting the community decide. There is, I think, in one of our, I don't know if it's in the letter or something, there is something to be said for, can one person trigger that or two people trigger that? So I don't think it has to be at the petition of 500 people. And I didn't hear the presentations on either side. I will say I was a little surprised to get this letter, and I guess I would be, he's not prepared to talk, I guess, but I think we are hearing from our board of trustees that they're interested in this. I don't know if we heard, am I misreading that?
Yeah, that letter was sent to us.
Yeah.
Not for us, but
So,
it was.
so that fact, I would be interested to hear from them. Maybe this isn't the venue or they aren't prepared, but I'd be interested in hearing their take on it as well.
So Farad, you're welcome to share with us anything that you want, with the understanding that we didn't invite you to make a formal presentation, so there's no expectation of that right now. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I would like to make some comments. I would like to first thank Sophie for that excellent review of the past discussions around fluoridation. And I also want to agree with Megan that I trust the CDC with a lot of decisions that they've made. What the letter on behalf of the board was written because we felt we were not part of the conversation when you had that workshop, and we felt we should be part of that conversation. And if you were under the impression that we were invited to speak at that workshop, we were not. And we would like to maybe have another workshop with the council and then have an open discussion about what our views on fluoridation in the drinking water are.
I would be first would find meeting with the trustees and hearing what they have to say. I would agree with what Megan and Cheryl commented on, that I would need to see, unless there's some pressing information that they presented, I would need to see a petition from the community to support going to a referendum.
Farad and the other members of the board, I'm sorry you had the experience of it not being clear or not feeling that you were invited to the process. And I personally would love to have further discussion, as I really value your input and expertise as our board of trustees. Thank you for all you do to safeguard our water.
So maybe we can have a discussion about where that fits or how that fits into our work plan. Certainly, we've got a busy schedule in the near future, but we now looks like have some time before the next round of dates comes up.
Next general election.
Yeah, so between now and the next general election, we could do some education and conversations on the topic. In particular, invite the board to join us for that.
We'd be delighted to meet with the town council and have a workshop on the issue.
Can I ask, is VZ making an overture as well, or have they made any overtures about having them speak with them? Because it requires both councils. It would require both councils, correct?
Yeah, I don't know how things got communicated last time. I know I worked extensively with the superintendent and the town manager and Jeezy to pull everybody together. And I would assume we would do the same thing again, so that we're getting the same information.
Are there any other public comments? In person or online?
I'm also trusting. Just figured it's not the other one.
Thanks for being here.
Sorry.
What is your name?
I'm Tom Schwartz.
Okay, so I think we have direction to go in regarding our interactions with the board and on the topic of fluoridation.
Judy Feinstein has her hand up.
Oh, okay, I can't see that.
I'm going to allow her to talk.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for letting me be here. I'll just say that as you proceed, again, on behalf of the Maine Oral Health Coalition, we're very happy to look for other information that you may want, answer any questions. I'm not particularly prepared to do it tonight either. I came to you after a 1-hour break from an 8-hour Zoom, and I'm kind of fried, but as I think most of you can understand. So really just through Sophie and probably Mark, I really invite you to send any questions, and we'll do our best to give you clear answers that are evidence-based. And good luck. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, great. Okay. Well, our third item on our agenda then is a review of our draft diversity, equity, and inclusion committee charge. The document was shared with us earlier in the week. Sophie, do you want to give a summary or introduction to that, or we can open it up straight for questions?
So let me just briefly summarize that the town council had, or not the town council, the council committee had a meeting on the 6th of June, talked about diversity, equity, inclusion committee. I took the notes from that meeting and drafted it into a more Orono kind of focused charge. Tried to draw what people had pointed out from other sources, and also ran it by committee chairs. And I think I've captured it, but just because I've captured it doesn't mean you can't change your mind or make whatever changes.
Well, I'd like to first thank Sophie for putting that together, and then hear from counselors first on any things that you particularly agree with, or particularly edits that you think are particularly necessary to the document that we have as a draft.
I was curious about, again, thank you for doing this work as well. Number 5 of the committee charge, understand and promote the town's internal processes for addressing individual operational concerns and complaints against employees. I guess I'd like to know just a little bit more about the thoughts going into that in particular. So I'm not sure if I support one of the charges being promoting the town's internal processes as much as I think understanding and maybe interacting with it at some level, but I guess I'm curious what you have in mind writing that out.
So one of the conversations or areas that you spent a considerable amount of time was like trying to delineate what was operational and what was policy. And one of the things that I heard you say, not you personally, but the group, was, you know, we have internal processes, that this was not a place where charges would be made against employees or people would make complaints about individual operation issues, and it would be vetted in this arena. So I think in order to promote, you've got to understand, but the idea meaning, the other thing I heard was these were hopefully community members who would be engaging throughout the community. So when they heard things that maybe staff or other counselors wouldn't hear could say, that sounds like an issue you should talk to the town manager about. Here is how you do that.
Gotcha.
Here is the process that you would go to. So I was trying to not say, don't deal with individual issues, because that seems kind of negative in a charge, but rather more directing to those elements of the conversation.
That's very helpful, thank you.
My only concern with this, not necessarily with the charge, but with committee membership, and I'm gonna put my, I'm gonna be very clear that that I believe, and this is what I will be in favor of, that the community members who are on this committee reside in Orono. So they are part of our community, they're part of our fabric, they understand the essence of Orono. If there is a concern where this committee wants to ask an outside consultant, I have no problem with that. But I believe that a municipal committee should be made up of municipal people. So when I see 10 to 12 community members who reside, work, study, or worship within the boundaries of the town of Orono, for me, they need to reside in Orono and not just visit or pass through on their way to the university.
I would.
So that's my.
With that sentiment, sorry. No, I read the same thing, and I do agree with that. I mean, I think about, you know, I do business and I go to Old Town, but I don't feel like I would be weighing in on their operations by any stretch. So I feel like it's for residents need to be part of it.
Yeah.
Well, but isn't that where the council appointment process really comes in? Because we're not saying anyone who applies can be on this committee. So if, you know, in that example, if a business person from Old Town who comes here sometimes, but doesn't really isn't really in the community or does a lot of business in the community or really tied in, if they put in an application, we might look at that person and say, well, they really don't, they're not really the fit for this committee because they don't have strong ties to this community. On the other hand, if we have, you know, one of our folks who've actually served on the ad hoc committee, you know, from the mosque, for example, they absolutely would be, they may not live here, they may live in Bangor, but they absolutely would have a lot of ability to say, yeah, I am part of the fabric of this community in terms of how DEI functions in this town, how services are delivered. I totally understand the argument about residency, but I also think very carefully about how the point of this group is to look at how town services are delivered and what is the experience of someone who spends a large amount of their time in this community, whether it's because they go to school here or because they worship here or because they are always here going to a particular coffee shop. What is the experience of the person who is spending a lot of time in this town? And you know, that doesn't, I don't think those decisions have to be made by people who have an address in the town borders. And I think that we, as the group that will look at the applications and appoint these members, have the ability to really talk, you know, deeply about whether we feel these candidates do have ties to the community that would warrant being on the committee.
And I would say that they would be consultants in issues that they require their expertise.
So I kind of agree with both positions. I can live with the language the way it is, but when it comes time to select committee members, I would be hard pressed to support someone who wasn't a resident, and that's for a very significant reason. So I'm okay with the language as it is, but personally would have to be really
Would you all
convinced.
feel more comfortable with something along the lines of preference being given to residents? Like, I see Tom's point, like what if we have 15 applicants and, 8 of them are from, or like a chunk of them are from Orono, and we're saying, well, we're gonna pass over the residents because we want X, Y, and Z person to be on the committee. I mean, do we put something in the language that says preference is given, or is that no, like legally?
Oh, no,
No. Okay.
you can absolutely do whatever you want with this. I think with absolutely no preference or recommendation, don't take this either way. But if you were looking for language, I might incorporate language more like the council's looking for people who truly are engaged and committed in, as opposed to preferences given. I think I would, if you want to limit, I think I would limit it that way to say it's not just, because if you had somebody who was a resident that really wasn't engaged in the community, that might not give you what you were looking.
Yeah, I'm very strongly against limiting it before it even starts to only residents. I think there are many members of many communities here that are not residents who still are invested and do care and would not be any less invested simply because they might live across the border in the town. I think Dina from the Islamic Center is an excellent example of somebody who cares a lot about this town, cares about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but happens to live in Bangor. She might not want to be part of this, was happy to be part of the ad hoc.
She already told me not to ask for the, I gave the ask for the ad hoc. She said, don't ask me for the full time. I'm gonna honor that.
She's on Bangor City Council.
Yeah.
She's got enough to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I said, Rob.
I was just gonna say, I think some sort of language I'm okay with saying like, our choice is weighted somewhat toward residents, but I don't want anything binding in that way. I think that really limits it in a way that's not necessary. People who are applying for this probably aren't gonna be like, people who don't care at all, they're just doing it just for the fun of it either.
So at the beginning, we talk about the fact that you want this committee to be focused on Orono, that this is not trying to solve problems in the rest of the world. If you would trust me to try to wordsmith this so you don't take a bunch of time trying to find words, I'm happy to try to do that and get it back out. I think the hope had been, if this was in the right ballpark, that we would be looking at just some final wordsmithing and putting it on the agenda for the 8th to be adopted, which then allows us to advertise and hopefully in September begin the process of selecting people to be approved at the October meeting.
So the focus of your wordsmithing would be,
To still allow, I mean, I think we come back to ultimately the town council retains the authority to appoint whomever they want. They're most interested in finding people who are truly engaged and part of the Orono community, whether they live, work, study, or worship. Does that get where what guys are trying to go?
I think it does. I think I'd like to see the language on that, because I think we have a model that already sort of sets a precedent that has to do with schools. We don't say to a family absent of superintendent's agreement, hey, just because you like RSU 26, you can come here from wherever, right? We say if you want to attend schools in RSU 26, pack up and move. And that's not to exclude people, but it's to say to people, if you really want to be part of this community, we would love to include you in this community. Right? So I'm not opposed to looking at the language, but I do think there's an argument and a precedent to be made for a residency requirement.
So I can't wordsmith diametrically opposed views.
I'm not saying I'm diametrically opposed to it. I'd like to see the wording.
Okay.
Before, I'd like to see the wording.
So would you be agreeable for me to kind of smith this with Jeff? And if he is agreeable, we'll put it on the agenda. And if not, it can wait till September, which technically in September, we could have the chance to circulate it and vote on it then still.
I mean,
I mean, I think it just, looking around the room, I think we have a couple of folks who are very strongly opposed to residency requirements, and some folks who are very strongly in favor of that, and a few who are kind of in the middle, so I think that makes sense.
all right. I
Are there,
wanna
are there
honor
issues or
everyone's
comments
voice.
on this draft unrelated to what we've discussed about committee charge and unrelated to the residency requirement?
I've got an overarching concern, and I think I brought it up last time, and I realized that the horse has left the barn and we're having this committee, but we heard at in the budget process pretty clearly that as a council over the last however many years, 4 to 5 years, we've drifted away from being operational based and are getting into more state and federal interest issues. And I feel like that was a warning to us that we have a finite amount of resources. And I know we have a finite amount of resources. So I guess the question to the council would be, what are we suggesting for staff time? Do we envision they just have the time to pick this up? Or do we envision that we are going to park in something else in order to support the efforts of this committee? Or are we envisioning that it's going to be higher at some point? We're going to need more staff. Because we also learned that we've had an increase of 16 staff in the last 7 years, which is not sustainable from an operations standpoint, from the budget standpoint. So I guess I'd be interested to hear from other council members. Do we just think this is just another thing for council, for our staff to do? Or do we envision something coming off their plate to accomplish this?
There's also there's an unspoken third part there though, which is we also could frame it as how much time and money are we going to potentially save not having to go out to resource some of the things that this committee will accomplish in terms of guidance or providing, I'm just saying, back to the jail conversations, like you can frame things in many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So you can look at this as an opportunity to support staff as much as you can look at it as a use of staff resources. Personally, I would answer your question by saying, I think this is worthy of budgeting and putting staff time to. I think we have to see how it goes to see what that means. But in terms of budgets being ethical documents, I think this is something that's worth resourcing. Personally, that's my view. But you can look at it in a variety of different ways in terms of how this impacts operations.
So as the person who's kind of looking at this, trying to vision how to support this, my assumption is that this committee would meet monthly. Based on the charge, I am staffing it. So the time I spend here might slow down other things. However, ultimately, we won't know until we actually try it. As discussed, this has a check-in in a year, right, to see what actually happens. We have an internal DEI committee that is already taking up time. So I can't even begin to estimate what this will look like in terms of additional time, because it really depends on what the committee does and how council interacts with the committee. But I do think that by the time we get to the next budget, I will be able to say, hey, this is what we've learned, this is what we've done, this is what can't be done because we don't have the staff resource to make that happen, and you all get to make those really hard decisions.
My hope is that with a member of council being a liaison member on the DEI committee, which is in charge, that the staff time commitment would be much more limited. Council member is the communicator.
I would hope so as well, but and who knows what the future will look like, but I share your concern over operations creep and we would hope that this would not be a thing where we would need a full-time coordinator next year. I think we could easily have an effective group process that doesn't, take over in a huge way right away. I did have sort of Sophie's comments about the staffing of the committee did make me wonder. Certainly, I think there's an argument for the town manager being part of the committee, but I wonder if in the charge it makes sense to frame it a little bit more openly as a member of staff and a member of council, so that a year from now, if you wanted to pass the baton to Bell to be on it, or just to provide more flexibility for who the staff rep is.
So
I was curious what your thoughts were on that.
So, two things. First thing is, council only charges me with anything. If you wanted to put or designate, I suppose we could do that. But the second thing is, and I got special dispensation to have Bell staff the environment committee, and she is clearly the technical person for that. Your DEI person is gonna likely be your HR person, and your policy maker. Your town manager is your HR person and your policy maker. So I think that that becomes a wordsmithing. If you want to put or designate, you can. But yeah, my contract, unless otherwise agreed, my primary role is to support the town council in this process.
And it's not like you're not part of the environment committee, because we do come to you and
Yeah, and I watch you. I
right.
watch you. I might give Bell some space, but
Right,
I'm
so-
often stalking.
Yeah, but Bell is our technical advisor, and she does know what she's doing.
Any other comments or questions from council? Do we have,
Captured the conversation. really well.
do we have any public comment, either online or in person?
No.
All right.
No, not online.
Okay. Any comment first? Then that is it for Community Development Committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good job. Move on to Finance and Operations Committee. One of these items might not take too much time. The other one might take more time than we want to spend tonight, but first on the agenda, a discussion of citizen requests related to flags on Main Street. And Sophie provided us with some great background information on that. I don't know whether you want to summarize that for
Sure.
anybody who didn't get it, the public.
Sure. The background, I supplied two different things. One was a PDF of the original email that came in. The public didn't necessarily see that, and I did that because I'm not sure that people understand when they submit a request to council that it might be there for the whole world to see. But I will summarize. So this came in from an 8th grader at Orono Middle School, thinking that she would like to see perhaps the flags that are on Main Street changed out to include some LGBTQ plus flags. I provided a little bit of background. So this highlights probably a place where our practice has gotten away from us a little bit, but from an operational perspective, the town does not control or own the utility poles on Main Street. So we have a written agreement that allows for American flags on the lit poles and UMaine flags on the every other pole, because the American flag has to be on a lit pole. The University of Maine is gracious enough to put those up for us. So they put up the original hardware. They also put the flags up. The flags go from Flag Day all the way, so sometime before Flag Day, all the way through to sometime after Veterans Day in November. Usually it's pretty close to both of those days. So the flags, the American flags are modeled on the gateway projects that you see in many historic downtowns or gateways. And the UMaine flags are provided as part of a joint marketing effort between the town and community development. So that was from an operational perspective, what we have there. The next, I tried to take some time to talk about the difference between government speech and First Amendment speech. So the town council, when it speaks, and I'm sure all of you understand the First Amendment, speaking can happen with more things than just words, that signage, banners, the choices of the causes that it chooses to speak on or against. When staff or the town council speak, it's considered government speech. And it allows the town council to weigh in on a myriad of issues, and you have a protected right to government speech. So when you decide to put a flag, a banner, a sign up, it is protected. You're allowed to do that. And if people want to criticize you within the community, they can come and do that in meetings or through the ballot box. When council or the community adopts a practice or a policy that says an individual is making a request and we allow that request or we don't allow that request, we are now treading into First Amendment speech. That means that, and Rob, I keep looking at you because you're so connected. So I'm not trying to speak directly to you. But the First Amendment brings into concerns because we are a government agency, unlike the private sector, like a business. We're not allowed to impinge on free speech. So if we say resident A wants X sign, and we allow that to happen, and then resident B wants X sign, we allow that to happen, and then resident C comes along and wants to put this banner up, and we don't like, not we, but the council doesn't like that, 99% of the time, the reason you don't like it is because of what it says. And Supreme Court has held that we are not allowed to judge signs based on the content of the sign. So we can judge it on what the material is, we can judge it on the size, we can judge it on the placement, we can say, yeah, you can only put it up for this much time, or it has to be in this location. But all of those decisions have to be blind of content. So I went through and I found a few towns that have individual flagpoles that are designated for the community to put signs up. And they talk about offensive language or non-political language or this kind of language. And so I went and I talked to the town attorney briefly. I had him on the phone for something else and said, so can I just create a policy that would allow the council to still field these questions, but within a framework? And he said, sure, as long as it has nothing to do with the content. So his concern is, while other places have these policies, he's not sure that those policies would hold up based on the Supreme Court decisions. So it's a nuance. If council is listening to their community and they have a desire, they can use their government speech to direct certain things, like a direction, which I think we need to do, where you have informally engaged staff and told staff that you want to do certain things to support Pride Month. You want to do certain things to support other times of the year. I think what we need to do is make that more explicit, that you're using your government speech as opposed to community members are doing X and cannot do Y. So I also think that the project along Main Street was very, very carefully constructed and has a lot of informal parts in it. I would suggest that if we wanted to have an ability for the council to be able to say, hey, this issue is important to us, and we want to put flags up or voice it in some way. We have 10 flagpole light poles that have banner attachments to them that go from the parking lot all the way up and wrap around and are right in front of the doors to council chamber. That seems like it would be a good place for us to be able to use your government speech to support whatever things council wants to. Would cost us, if we put them on every single banner, it would cost us about $1,000. So if you did half, it would cost half that. And so maybe in the future, council could think about if you wanted to go in that direction, sometimes of the year, we would be limited. Snow, when we get into heavy snow and ice, it would get more difficult even with our own equipment to be able to put those up. But that's what you got from me in background.
So even if it went in that direction, we would still be relying on the university. We would do it ourselves.
Yeah, these are low enough that Rob, from, as he said, from like April to November, which I don't want to open up the ice discussion again, but that came from Rob. We went and looked at them. There's one that's would be a little bit difficult, but we think we can probably work around. But we have equipment to be able to do that. So it would be a matter of planning. As everything, you probably couldn't tell me 2 weeks before an event that you wanted something up, because it would take designing banners, ordering banners, and then arranging in the schedule to get them up.
What budget does that come out of?
Oh, it all depends.
On the banner.
And again, if we decided to go in this direction, we would need to have some sort of a policy so everybody would know the council is making these government speech decisions. Questions, comments?
Are we talking about the poles that don't have the American flag? Or are we talking about the ones between with no lights on them, or are we talking about all of them?
No, I think she was talking about changing out portions of them.
I think the banners are
Oh, the banners.
are like these little black ones that have like the arms that come out.
But like the walkway all the way up to the parking lot.
That's what we're
She-
talking.
Yeah, she was
Oh.
talking about Main Street
Okay.
flags. I am suggesting that perhaps an alternative
I
for
see.
some of those conversations might be these banners that we already have the infrastructure for and staff can manage. That, I was just offering an option. Laura Mitchell.
I like your option. Wait, you said, did you say something?
I said Laura, oh, she put her hand down. Never mind. Oh, it's back up.
Well, let's first see if other councilors have questions, then we'll go to Laura.
Yeah. I
Don't
mean,
go away, Laura.
in addition to some of the potential, so we could mitigate the Main Street issue by saying, okay, well, we're not just letting any citizen who makes a request put up flags on Main Street. Council will make decisions about rotating flags on Main Street, and that's technically would be like the better option for what Sophie's saying about free speech versus government speech. However, I'm very conscious of the favors that we ask of the University of Maine. And so my question would be like, if we have an alternate option, which Sophie's provided to us, which I feel is great because we actually have more control over it. I would not want to, there's only so many favors to ask of the university. We have a nice cooperative relationship, but we do have a lot of things that we need from them. And so, is rotating the flags on Main Street constantly throughout the year something that we want to tap favors for when we have an option to kind of honor the spirit of that request in a way that's manageable through town operations? I think I really like Sophie's suggestion. I think that it gives us an opportunity to honor the spirit of these kinds of requests and make a process for people to let us know what kind, whether they think certain things should be going up. And it's also an opportunity, just that we were talking about the DEI committee, like it's also an opportunity for our DEI committee to make, perhaps if they're interested in taking up the issue, like what are different things that we could be honoring throughout the year? I mean, we frequently have these conversations around Pride Month, But like, there's a lot of different ways that we could represent the intersectionality of this community that's not just about LGBTQ plus folks, though that is important too, but like, this gives us an opportunity to kind of think about how we can celebrate. That's one of the things that the ad hoc committee actually brought up, is like ways that the town can celebrate the diversity of the town, of its residents. And so I think this is like, this fits together really well.
Other comments?
I'd just like to see the language on that to make sure that,
Well, a whole policy will come back.
yes, so that we know that when these, and it's clear to the public as well, that when these decisions about displaying banners are made, they are generated by interest of the council. They're not in response to rotating cadre of community.
And we had that same conversation with proclamations and resolutions, that we didn't have a policy at the beginning, and that anyone could do anything because of the free speech right that they have, and to actually sit down and have a policy and make a policy was an important part of that process. So I think it would dovetail the same way.
One of the things this student who wrote this letter prompting the discussion offered is that she would be interested in, you know, fundraising and kickstarting some money for banners, which I think is really generous, and I think could be sort of a nice model for, I wonder what people think about if and when we develop policy, encouraging people to cost share with the town on things that we decide are town council speech. Given that I think people might offer that anyway, and I would minimize the burden to the town of that.
I'd like to go to Laura Mitchell. Laura, are you still with us?
Hi, this is Nina, actually.
Hi, Nina.
So thank you for discussing this and pricing the flags out. I agree that it doesn't just have to be pride flags, and we can do, there's lots of different options for different parts of the year. And I can raise the whole portion of money to donate these flags.
Very generous and ambitious offer. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
You know, I think our next step is going to be having our town manager develop a policy for us. And we will revisit this issue when that policy is developed, and we'll let you know when that'll be.
Awesome, thank you.
I think it's gonna be September 19th, but that seems so far away right now.
It's not very far away. Thank you, Nina. Okay.
Comment?
Sure.
Can you come right, sit right over
Yeah,
here?
we want to get you on the owl. Could you identify yourself, please?
My name's Doug Talmuter, live in Orono resident. So could you repeat briefly government speech?
So government speech, the town council staff have a right to speak on issues of importance to the town. They're not obligated to weigh like balance, you know, they don't have to, they're not limited in what they can say. So they can talk about, for example, supporting LGBTQ plus or supporting resolutions on
Ukraine war effort.
Yep. Yes, they could come out and talk about Arbor Day or anything that's important to the town. They can take positions on political issues as they impact the town. The key for government speech is it has to be item of importance to the town. That is defined by the town. So,
And that would be the policy that you're being asked to write up?
yep, and what that policy would say is, for example, if you were really interested in wanting to support the Ukrainian war effort and you wanted to put up approximations of Ukraine flags, you wouldn't just be able to come in and say, I'd like you to put up flags, please. Because that would be you. putting your issue forward. However, the town council could say, you know what, I have heard from the community, not just one person, but in general, that this is an issue. And let's talk about, is this an issue of importance to the community and why is it? And they make a decision and they can decide to put banners up. Now, they could say, I think it's important that we put banners up, we have no money. So if somebody wanted to donate money for that purpose, the town would be very interested in putting those banners up.
So my question, I guess, then, and maybe this is for clarification, is concerning the crosswalk, has the town already overstepped the line there?
No, the town has a proclamation that supports Pride Month. That's government speech. They have decided that it was important for us to, for the town to acknowledge and celebrate Pride Month. So that is all in keeping with government speech.
And so then concerning the flags on the poles, the pride flags on the poles, that would be considered individual speech if the council approved of that?
No, if the council approved of it, which I would argue under the proclamation, it's a little loose, but that was the intent, that would also be government speech.
Well, I would suggest that we be very careful in order to avoid favoritism and prejudice, even, we might call reverse prejudice, that could exist. If people have various views on other things, stopping a war, supporting a war.
So that's why it becomes a council conversation, Doug, that the council then is making a decision what the town is going to support or not support. And then residents have mechanisms to hold town councilors accountable for the decisions that they make. They have public comment periods, they have the press, they have the ballot box to do that.
And the concern you're raising is exactly the concern that many of us have in moving forward on this.
Thank you.
That work? Yeah. Thanks.
Any other comments? Ready to move on?
Yeah.
It says here, brief.
So I'm gonna make this so brief. So you know how sometimes practice can lead you down a path, and because it's the way it's always been done, it just kind of, that's the way we do it. In review of chapter 2 of the ordinance that relates to procurement and GASB, which is the Governmental Accounting Standards Board that says we have to follow those pronouncements. Our current procurement process has deviated, and it is around, I think, expediency. So the goal of the procurement process is to make sure that the town is buying its goods and services in a way that is in the best interest of the town, is open so that you can't get those, I really like Leo and I'm gonna buy my services from Leo all the time, and I don't care that Jeff has the same service and might do it cheaper kind of idea. Was that a good one? So when the town's procurement process says that we are going to have formal bids and so RFPs and RFQs for expenditures over $5,000, that is just not feasible. We are making those expenditures on a pretty, routine basis. And there are caveats that we've called out in the internal controls manual that say if it's for ongoing budgeted expenses, but we really have gotten to this point where the $1960 of 5,000 is just, we're not even near the ballpark of that. So what I'm trying to find out tonight, it's a very simple question. I don't know if you can answer it, but it's my very simple question. I have to do one of two things. I've identified this. So I either have to bring our process in line with the ordinance, or we need to change the ordinance. Either one of those is going to take resource. One is your resource, and the other is my resource that would require, I would need resource to be able to do the RFPs and the formal bidding process. So you'd end up with a procurement person, half person. I will tell you that is not my recommendation. My recommendation is that we look at updating, looking at maybe CPI, looking at putting caveats in for things that are relatively routine. I think a $5,000 limit on a single purchase item for council approval makes perfect sense. I don't know that we need to really change that. But I think the way you come to that purchase decision, we need to think about changing.
So we need a decision tonight, bring the ordinance up to a more reasonable standard. Other,
I agree.
I also wasn't comfortable with that yet.
I knew I'd have a little that you need staff. All right,
Chief Tittle.
so my plan is, I'd like to try to move this forward quite quickly so that we can make changes to the internal controls manual before we get too far into this year.
What do you have in mind? At this point, you must have a number, some kind of number in mind, right?
So I want to refine it, but I would look at mechanisms for sole sourcing. Right now, our sole source is at 25,000. I think council should be able to make a decision that's higher than that, 75,000. I think that we should have carve outs that would allow town council to renew contracts if we are in a place where, for example, if there's only one solid waste vendor in the region that is providing service, or everybody else is putting that out to bid, and it's coming in $100,000 more for the other provider. If we can negotiate a better deal with a negotiation as a sole source, that might make sense. So I think I'm looking at giving some carve outs that council would have control over. I'm looking at bidding full on RFP, probably 25,000. But I want to look at CPI, and I want to look at what other communities have. I think Bangor's at 100,000, and that's too much for me, too rich for my blood. But I think we want to look at that in policy. But I have that kind of slated in on the plan. Speaking of the plan, you'll see in your well, I'll talk about that in manager report.
we ready to move on?
Yep.
So we'll go down to manager's report.
So in your shared drive, in the folder that's called schedule and something else, you now have a couple of new things in there. One of which is a single page, here are the meetings to the end of the quarter. The other is a 3-page, here are the meetings through the end of the quarter, here are the things I think we're going to be talking about, and here are the things in the hopper, which I'm just going to add a couple from this meeting into that. That's just, this is the document that the council community, the council committee chairs will have access to on an ongoing basis. Staff has access to, but it's how we track what's going on. And that would be a place that every once in a while, every time I make major adjustment to it, I will update what you have in your folder. But that's the place to look. If you think something should be coming up and you're not seeing it there, it means you should probably give me a jingle because I have missed it. So there's that for you. I have fielded a couple questions about the Stillwater Bridge and the process that was undertaken to reduce the weight limit there. So first and foremost, the Stillwater Bridge is not in Orono, it's in Old Town. It also is not controlled by a municipality. It is the property of the Maine Department of Transportation. That bridge has been on the list to be repaired or replaced for years. And it finally went out to bid and came in way, way too high. So they've broken the project into pieces and are planning to bid it separately, but it's going to be probably at least 2 years before they are ready to fix the bridge. In the meantime, that bridge is, I don't know if folks remember, but a few years ago, there were a couple of bridge failures in other parts of the country, and it really changed the way state DOTs manage their bridge inventory. So they have a very aggressive inspection program. And based on the result of that inspection, they determined that the weight limit on that bridge had to come down, especially if it was going to get us through 2 more years. So safety of the traveling public is the most important piece. DOT did provide a heads up to our Public Works Department and Old Town's Public Works Department. We were not sure exactly when they were gonna make it public. Time between public and signs going up was almost instantaneous. But it's not a decision that we can, that there's input into. I mean, they've evaluated it, and we're fortunate that they're gonna be able to keep it open. So this means for a little bit of time, there is a higher likelihood that we're gonna see some big trucks coming through town. So people need to be careful. The police department is aware of it and is gonna be looking for speeders. Thing about big trucks is they always look like they're going faster than they really are. But we'll try to keep as much of an eye on it as possible.
So we're just gonna deter them around this way to get to Old Town? Through here and around
So-
Route 2, or Route 1, whatever. that
So
route is.
some of them might choose to do the interstate and get off on 43 and over.
And go that way.
But what we know, back in the day when before the interstate lifted its weight limit, we had a lot of garbage trucks coming through the middle of Orono. It just was what happened.
Right.
So we've seen it before. This is, the Route 2 corridor is a place where a lot of trucks come down through and pick up the interstate. So I would imagine coming up Route 2 might be a choice, and also we might see them come down College Ave. That would add a lot of time.
Yeah.
To their route. So,
Have they addressed, I mean, what's concerning to me is the rush hour traffic and cars stopped on the bridge going both directions at 5 o'clock, and that's well over 30,000 tons.
So
when you have all of those cars.
So I can't get into the specifics
Right.
because that's like way over my head. But I can tell you that part of the reason that you have things stopped has to do with the way both of those intersections, the Bennett Road intersection
Yeah.
and the College Ave intersection, are working. And part of what was removed and built into 2 separate projects is the upgrade of that College Ave intersection, which will make a big difference in how traffic flows. But to answer your question, my assumption is that they probably have taken that into consideration, and probably part of their consideration was, what if a big heavy truck was one of those vehicles stopped?
Right.
So the other thing that's getting some conversation in social media right now is the road closure on Route 2. So just as you are leaving Orono, right before you get to the formal gateway, go down the hill, right in that kind of that valley is a very large box culvert that Orono, BZ, Orono Water District all work together to lobby to get a little bit of grant funding and a whole lot of local dollars to have the state fix that. That is a critical corridor. If that box culvert fails, you're looking at gas, water, the power lines would probably come down. It would be a catastrophic situation for Orono and BZ, which is why we're doing it. Unfortunately, it's very deep and it's a 30-foot hole. You cannot do a 30-foot hole half in the road and keep one lane of traffic, which is why there's road closure. DOT has been working with Sergeant and are really minimize that road closure down to 30 days, but it's going to cause issue. It is a main thoroughfare between Orono and Bangor. It also is going to cause the community connector to change its route. The school bus is going to be impacted. People trying to get to gas and Starwalk Stable are going to be Silver Auto. They're all going to be impacted. People are doing the best they can, and we're really fortunate to have that risk mitigated through this project. But inconvenient.
Close now.
No, it closes the 1st of August through the 29th of August. Now I know why my husband wants to take vacation.
Get out of town quick.
So if people are watching the news, they saw that the town of Orono is being sued for an accident that involved the community connector. I will tell you, I don't know anything about this. We were not served, so it was filed in state court, which would tell me that it would be subject to the Maine Tort Claims Act. Under the Maine Tort Claims Act, the towns are all governmental entities are supposed to receive notice of a claim within 365 days of the incident, or if the incident involved a minor, within 365 days of that minor attaining a majority of 18. I have not seen tort claims action. They reference a transit district that the town is part of. Sometimes things happen through tradition. I cannot find any documentation anywhere that we are part of a transit district. I find documentation that we buy services from the city of Bangor. Having said that, I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV, and I just am waiting. I have not been served the suit, and I don't know what this really means for me. And the last is if we have anybody who's interested in taking a tour of the 9 Dragon facility.
I totally want to.
9
Heck yeah.
Dragon has a facility tour on August 11th at 2 p.m.
Oh, I'm like, what on earth are you talking about?
Nine Dragons.
So I am not going to be here, but Belle has agreed graciously to represent in my stead. I think the easiest way to do this is not a town function. So I would say if people want to go, I would be happy if you could contact Nancy and let her know in the next couple of days would be great. And we will RSVP for folks because this is not a town function and there will be, by the looks of it, more than 3 of you there. The way to make sure that this is not a public meeting is for you to not talk about town affairs while you are there. And if you would promise to do that, I would be super happy to facilitate you having a really cool experience. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense.
And the last thing, I sent an email out earlier today and left a survey at your, yes, space. I am looking for your top 5 or less, 1, doesn't matter how many, suggestions or goals for what you would like to hear back from the community. I did it this way in hopes that you would be able to fill it out and give it back to me. If you don't have time for that and it's easier for you to email me your top, however, I'm fine with that. However, this is for, we're going to take this and hear back from council, see your top 5 or so, however many, try to identify themes and use those to plan these community conversations along with some of the things that staff is seeing. So what I'm looking for at first is, are there things that more than one or two council, like, are there some similar themes? And if there are, that's great. If there are not, we might end up putting them in a hat and just picking. But this is not, I don't want people to feel like they put something down and it's not on the agenda for the first meeting on September 1st, that we would be like, that's bad. And we are hoping to be able to publish an agenda for that meeting or get word out about that meeting starting early next week. We've got the community meeting about the facilities happening. The next step would be to start planning the community meeting about what is of interest. And the other item that counselors will see based on some feedback that I've heard in committee meetings, we're gonna do a survey, a written survey in the next, asking people to contact us in the Observer, but also online, to talk about where do you get your information from the town? And where
That
would
was
you
my first
suggest that you
question.
don't? Yeah, that I think is more of a survey type question,
Yeah.
but yeah, to understand where people are getting their information. And we figure from the Observer, we'll catch the people who maybe aren't online. That information. We'll put it at the library and I don't know, wherever Pete decides. That is it.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
All in favor?
thank
We
you.
are adjourned.
Just.
Perfect.